Information is power, but sometimes you just need to chop some wood, which is exactly what our guy is doing to pass the time, even if he's dealing with the social headache of a camping trip. Because mentioning a childhood camping trip to a new girlfriend usually ends in manual labor, and now he's officially the group's designated lumberjack, despite the fact that most people just buy their firewood at the store. But hey, being alone in the woods beats dealing with Hannah's friends for a minute. Since being the new guy in a group with years of baggage is always a little awkward, especially when Tyler is already losing his mind over a poorly set up tent, while David and Izzy just hang out by the trailer, completely unbothered, and Hannah tries to keep the peace by suggesting that Zach can fix everything, because Zach is apparently the group's resident handyman who loves to lend a hand, though our protagonist is already busy enough chopping logs in the background. And his solo piece is interrupted when Tyler starts barking orders again, calling him out for more firewood duty like he's some kind of hired help, while the blade slices through the air with a satisfying sharp sound, and the two men lock eyes with that classic unspoken tension as Tyler watches him head back into the forest, definitely not a fan of the vibe, while complaining to Hannah that her boyfriend is just way too intense. But Hannah just brushes it off because she knows exactly who she's dating. Zach decides to call it a night, tossing the axe aside because they have enough wood, but the ground beneath his boots suddenly erupts in a violent, pulsating violet energy, and he can only stare in disbelief as the entire forest begins to warp around him, floating in an endless void where glowing, circular gates rip open the fabric of reality, while a massive surge of power knocks him off balance in the middle of nowhere. Then a blue holographic interface pulses into existence, announcing that the system is initiating, so Zack stands there, completely floored by the sudden appearance of a multiverse welcome screen, wondering if he's actually dreaming or if the heat is finally getting to his brain, as the system scrolls through a terrifying list of planetary mergers and geography adjustments, and the chilling reality of upgraded wildlife starts to sink in with every new notification. While he frantically calls out for Hannah and David, hoping this is just a prank, but his voice echoes into the empty void without a single soul hearing his cries, because the system is already moving on to its next phase, initiating the first incursions, and a bright red error message flashes, stating he is occupying the same space as a herald, so he's forced into a high-stakes role for his own survival right here on the spot. While he struggles to process exactly what kind of monster he's supposed to be fighting, then a massive, crimson-furred beast lunges from the portal with razor-sharp teeth bared, leaving Zack to realize that the nightmare he's staring at is a full-blown predator, as the creature lets out a deafening roar that shakes the very foundations of the void, and the final system prompt confirms the worst. It's a one-on-one death match against the Herald. 100,000, that is the gap between life and death for Zachary Atwood, and the system makes it crystal clear that the lowest roller gets erased immediately, biting back a curse. He realizes the sheer insanity of these rigged odds. Rejecting the unfair game, Zachary tries to refuse the command to roll, yet the protocol ignores his protest and forces the dice to spin anyway. Blue digits flicker in a rapid, high-speed blur as the system takes control. Frantically slashing at the interface, Zachary demands an immediate halt to the process, shouting into the void. He begs for the roll to stop, but the system remains deaf. A sharp ping signals the final result, locking in a score of 96. Realizing he has barely squeezed out a decent number, he holds his breath, watching the Herald's counterspin. Zachary knows that even a high score might not be enough. Looming over him with a predatory snarl, the beast prepares to finalize the outcome. Gears whirring as the Herald's own numbers begin their inevitable, crushing climb. Flashes of his father haunt him, a gut-wrenching reminder of everything he is leaving behind. Memories of his little sister Mackenzie burn in his mind, fueling his crushing regret. Wondering if anyone at the campsite even realizes he has vanished into this hell. Facing the Crimsonford predator, Zachary feels his grip on reality starting to slip. Seeing the Herald's counter spin toward a terrifying total, he refuses to accept his fate, white-knuckling his makeshift weapon. He decides he's done playing by the system's rules, throwing caution to the wind. Zachary prepares to fight regardless of the probability. Zachary Atwood screams for a single chance at survival, and the system locks his roll in at 91, blinking a cold congratulations as he realizes he actually pulled it off. But the Herald Urquez isn't going down without a monstrous, reality-warping roar, lashing out with a final, desperate burst of crimson energy that tears through the arena, while Zachary stands his ground, bracing for the impact of the creature's dying malice, feeling the surge of raw power crackle through his veins as the beast disintegrates, until the system confirms Urquez is vanquished and standard protocols resume, flooding his vision with notifications of multiple level-ups and successful spawns, dumping him back into the forest floor with a dull, heavy thud, where Zachary lies gasping for air, clutching his chest in disbelief, wondering if he really survived the impossible trial and desperately checking his body for wounds while trying to find his bearings, as the morning sun filters through the trees of a world that feels wrong, forcing him to question where he has been dropped. Because the system warns him that Earth is merging with other planets due to energy shortages, making Zachary rub his temples as he wonders if he is losing his mind, and he starts trekking through the dense woods, trying to find his way back to the camp, moving with a cautious, lethal focus as he scans the unfamiliar foliage, until he finally spots the campsite trailer, only to find the fire long dead and his group gone. Zachary Atwood calls out for his group, sensing that something has gone horribly wrong. Crunching sounds pull his attention toward the campsite, where gear lies scattered and abandoned. Realization hits him hard as he recognizes the signs of a struggle, revealing a monstrous beast lurking right behind the trailer, eyes glowing with a predatory hunger that makes the air grow cold, lunging forward with a speed that defies physical boundaries. closing the distance to tear him apart before he can even react, gripping his axe with white-knuckled intensity, swinging with a desperate, raw strength that channels his survival instinct, connecting squarely with the creature, carving a deep wound into its hide. Blood sprays as Zachary realizes his own power has shifted into something entirely new, crashing through the underbrush. He sends the beast flying backward from the sheer force. While system notifications flicker in his vision, confirming the reality of this nightmare, identifying the threat as a monster tied to the cryptic dice roll from before, forcing him to accept that the trial was not a dream, calling out once more for his friends, but only the growls of the beast answer, stomping through the woods in a frantic attempt to create some distance, seeing the creature recover with terrifying agility, proving it is faster than it looks. Dodging a follow-up attack that shreds the ground where he just stood, realizing the monster handles like a brick, but its raw speed is still a massive problem. The realization hits that he needs a radical plan to survive, committing to a desperate gamble that could either save him or finish him. Zachary pivots hard, baiting the beast to follow him away from the wreckage, taunting the monster to keep its focus locked entirely on him. Sprinting toward the dense tree line with his arm bleeding profusely, tearing through the brush to put distance between himself and the predator, the beast closes the gap with terrifying, unnatural lunges, gripping his weapon tighter as his own blood slickens the handle, backing into the shadows of an ancient tree to wait for the perfect moment. Planting his feet firmly to stop the retreat and hold his ground, eyes narrow as he watches the predator barrel through the forest. Shaking violently, he questions if his body is failing under the sheer pressure, rejecting the cowardice of fear in favor of a cold, focused resolve, realizing this burning sensation in his veins is pure, unadulterated rage, screaming at the top of his lungs to draw the monster into the kill zone, leaping out of the dark as the beast lunges with lethal intent, narrowly avoiding the creature's claws by a fraction of an inch. Slamming the axe into the beast's flank with every ounce of his remaining strength, pinning the monster to the ground as it thrashes in a futile effort to escape, watching the life drain from those glowing red eyes as the predator finally falls. Zachary brings the axe down with a final, desperate surge of power, driving the steel deep into the monster's neck to seal its fate, snapping the creature's spine with a sickening crunch that echoes through the trees. Dismissing the beast as nothing compared to the nightmares he has already survived, watching the predator let out one last, distorted roar before the end, Zachary hacks away at the remains, his mind snapping under the weight of his own brutality. Steel arcs through the air in a blur of motion and crimson, carving through the carcass again and again to ensure the threat is completely eradicated, finishing the job with a savage, rhythmic precision that leaves nothing left. Standing over the carnage as the system chimes to confirm the kill, heavy breaths rack his body as he finally realizes the fight is over. Bloody handprints smear the surrounding foliage as he tries to steady himself. Footsteps drag across the damp forest floor while his strength rapidly fades, leaving a trail of blood behind him with every agonizing step toward the road, calling out into the silence to see if anyone is left to witness this. Stumbling against the side of a vehicle while his consciousness begins to slip, collapsing against the metal frame in a desperate attempt to find a way home, staring into the distance as the sun begins to rise over the horizon, closing his eyes for a moment to escape the reality of the blood on his hands, waiting for the light to take him away from this godforsaken woods. Zachary rubs his head while trying to shake off the lingering haze of his exhaustion. Staring at his own blood-stained palms with a grim realization of the fight's toll, phone light flickering to life as he checks the time and date, eyes widening in genuine disbelief when the reality of the situation hits home. 3 full days have vanished since he collapsed in these woods, scanning the empty campsite for Hannah and the others only to find their gear abandoned, forcing himself to accept the cold truth that they likely are not coming back. Moving deeper into the forest while his senses stay on high alert, checking the skin on his hand where his wounds have already begun to mend, wondering how he survived such lethal injuries against all rational logic, trapped in this isolated wilderness without a signal or any way to call for help, eyeing the dead battery of his vehicle as his last escape route fails, gripping his makeshift blade tighter as a new threat emerges from the foliage. Facing down a monstrous creature that looks like something from another planet, questioning if the entire world is being overrun by an extraterrestrial invasion, memories of his father flash through his mind during the heat of the encounter, catching a glimpse of Kenzie while the weight of his mission intensifies, focusing on the singular goal of finding a way back to his family, lunging forward into the brush to confront the beast head-on. Burying the axe deep into the creature to end the threat once and for all, Zachary gasps as the adrenaline fades and the reality of his situation sinks in, staring out at an endless ocean that confirms his worst fear of being stranded, wondering if this is even an island or something far more twisted, cursing the system for dumping him into this nightmare without a single explanation, shouting his frustration into the dense forest as the world around him begins to shift. System notifications flood his vision with a barrage of titles and stat boosts, leveling up and gaining attribute points in real time, struggling to process the sudden influx of data about his own existence, checking his character sheet to see he is now level 16, realizing with disbelief that the world has effectively become a massive video game, noting how titles and achievements are the primary drivers of his newfound power. Reading through a list of active quests that demand he conquer this entire region, identifying that glowing red beam as the source of the ongoing incursion, seeing an urgent prompt to establish an outpost before he gets overrun, deciding that a permanent base is better than dying in this monster-infested wilderness, confirming the command to create his outpost immediately, watching as the system officially recognizes his new settlement. Catching his breath while trying to plan his next strategic move, spinning around with his axe raised as a mysterious entity appears behind him, locking eyes with the strange creature and demanding to know what it is. The mysterious entity scoffs at Zachary, confirming its disdain for his humanity, floating in the air while calling out their mutual disappointment in this encounter. Zachary lunges forward with his axe but instantly loses his footing. Struggling to regain balance as a massive, scaled tail coils tight around his body, cursing his momentary lapse in focus while the creature constricts his chest, screaming in frustration as the serpent-like monster drags him through the brush, realizing the hard way that this world offers no grace for simple mistakes, bracing against the crushing pressure while the serpent tightens its grip further, forcing his hand against the creature's scales in a desperate attempt to break free. Watching the monster's fangs draw closer as he fights for every breath, slamming his fist into the serpent's head with everything he has left, hearing the sickening crack of bone as the monster's skull gives way, tearing himself loose from the coils while the creature writhes in agony, internalizing the cold truth that only raw power dictates survival here, dragging his body from the brush, fully aware that weakness is a death sentence. Snarling with newfound resolve that he will reach the pinnacle of strength, watching the entity hover away unimpressed by his display of force, lamenting the failure of his outpost plan while the creature mocks his choices, listening to the entity critique his poor strategy across the multiverse, staring up in confusion as the creature suddenly vanishes into the sky, burying his blade deep into the serpent's remains to finalize the kill. Feeling the sudden shift in the atmosphere as the floating orb descends, watching the glowing entity pulse with a strange, otherworldly intensity, standing amidst the carnage of the giant snake as the silence settles in, gripping his weapon tight while keeping a wary eye on his visitor, hearing the creature admit that maybe Zack has some hidden potential after all, narrowing his eyes at the strange orb that just tried to kill him, learning the entity calls itself Vethabarak, or Abby for short. Introducing himself as Zack while questioning how a floating eye even speaks, finding out this thing is actually an assistant assigned to his outpost, snapping back that he never heard about any pixies or tutorial helpers, listening to Abby react with a smirk as the realization hits, learning in shock that this entire world event only started 3 days ago, watching the orb tap its appendages together while processing the news, realizing the entity is surprised that Zack is a so-called defier. Getting the cold facts about his world being dragged into the multiverse, seeing the vast cosmic scale of this new, terrifying reality, understanding that while others get a safe start in tutorial towns, grasping why his own situation is fundamentally different and far more dangerous, realizing that without the ability to cultivate energy, most humans are doomed to die. Standing there while the entity explains the grim reality of being a defier. Wondering if his end is already written in the system's ledger, hearing that defiers are anomalies who surpass the expected power limits, recalling the brutal fights where Zack defied the system's attempts to erase him, getting warned that while his potential is immense, the path ahead is unforgiving, snapping back at the assistant that near-death experiences are not an opportunity, watching the cosmic entity emphasize that only the system's cold voice determines his worth. Listening to the floating eye dish out a warning about the cowardice of failure, seeing the entity tighten its grip as it spells out the price of quitting, demanding to know if these endless quests are the only way to survive, realizing with frustration that he never actually had a choice in this matter, learning that the system is literally watching his every move, observing the floating entity pause as it considers the next instruction. Getting hit with the demand to compress 3 months of work into one, watching the entity suddenly get crushed by an external force, calling out for Abby as the entity vanishes into thin air, reading the system notification about the early return of the administrator, staring in disbelief at the empty space where his only source of info just stood, processing the impossible deadline now hanging over his head. Shifting focus to a grand ballroom where the true players of this game finally reveal themselves. Agres stands alone on the balcony, nursing his drink while the gala rages below. Aaliyah approaches with a sharp remark about his sour mood, insisting that he should be celebrating the latest political development, questioning what exactly there is to toast to in this cesspool of power, pointing out that Akril just named him Incursion General, a title people would kill to possess. As a silver-haired noble mocks his lack of ambition to his face, Agres retorts with cold eyes that his reputation precedes him. While the noble continues to push, demanding he trade his lifestyle for the front lines, Aaliyah tries to goad him into a fight, mocking his penchant for brothels, but Agres dismisses the entire game as a trap for fools, suddenly coughing up dark ichor as a hidden poison takes hold, collapsing to the floor in front of the horrified crowd. While Aaliyah screams for help, desperate to identify the culprit, and Agres fades out, reflecting on how easily puppets strangle themselves with their own strings, shifting scenes to a peaceful, babbling stream in the wild where a predator laps at the water, unaware of its surroundings, ignoring the chirping birds as it focuses on its drink, until a small, vibrant butterfly flutters down from the canopy, landing softly on the beast's snout. And the creature freezes as the fragile insect marks it for something else entirely. The beast snaps its head around toward the sudden presence, finding Zack already closing the distance with a lethal strike, and he severs the creature's neck in one clean motion, earning the Demon Slayer title and a much-needed level up, breathing a sigh of relief as he surveys the kill by the water, noting how the system makes leveling feel almost too efficient. While he stares at his accumulated free stat points, realizing after the recent struggle that holding back is a death sentence, so he begins dumping everything he has into his core attributes, finalizing his new power distribution to ensure he survives the immediate threats, keeping his focus sharp as he scans the surrounding forest, thinking back to the 25 days remaining on his first-month deadline and questioning why Vethabarak insisted he finish those tasks in record time. Wondering if her urgency hides a truth he is not yet prepared to face, especially if completing these quests early triggers a hidden system reward, or if the alternative is simply a much faster path to his own grave, splashing the cool stream water over his face to clear his head and steeling himself for the brutal reality waiting just over the horizon, shouldering his weapon with a grim sense of purpose, because the tutorial is ending and the real work is about to begin. Zack sets up camp by the trailer to finally catch his breath, skewering a slab of meat over the fire for a much-needed meal, while reflecting on his titles that reward being the absolute first to act, seeing the system confirm his dominance with massive stat bonuses for his solo kills, taking a bite of his dinner as he mulls over his current standing, realizing that building his own outpost did not trigger any special rewards, which means someone out there in the world already beat him to it. Proving that other people outside his tutorial are potentially far more dangerous, leaving him to wonder just how much stronger those elites have already become, so he turns to the shop to find something that can actually help him, realizing every single item in the catalog carries a heavy price tag in Nexus coins, and spotting a potential game changer while scrolling through the interface, a teleporter system that could finally bridge the gap between him and civilization. Wondering if it could even locate or transport his missing family, until he sees the ridiculous 10 million coin cost and his motivation stalls, knowing that grinding demon dogs for that amount of currency is basically impossible. So he shifts his focus back to the active quests for a more efficient path, aiming to unlock the high-tier rewards by conquering the incursion and upgrading his outpost, and deciding that hoarding his wealth is a luxury he cannot afford right now. Because every coin he spends must be a direct investment in his own survival. Zack settles on 2 critical purchases to maximize his efficiency, starting with the Eye of Discernment to finally identify his enemy's weaknesses, and securing the F-grade Mother-Daughter Gathering Array for passive energy generation, which effectively turns his downtime into a constant source of power, yet he realizes that waiting for the slow trickle of energy just will not cut it. So he commits to a brutal training regimen of relentless hunting, stalking the demon dogs through the forest to gain an early tactical advantage, finding that his improved combat rhythm makes taking them down almost routine, though the occasional ambush still tests his reaction times and reflexes, forcing him to adapt his fighting style to survive every close call, while he inspects the battlefield for clues to refine his approach further. Mastering the art of the swing to conserve energy for longer engagements, and learning how to deflect incoming lunges before countering with his own strikes, putting the Eye of Discernment to work to categorize the barghists, while establishing supply caches across the island to ensure he can hold his ground, which allows him to sustain his hunting streaks for days on end, engaging in desperate skirmishes where every swing of the axe counts, and enduring the physical toll of constant combat as he pushes his limits, eventually slaughtering hundreds of beasts as the levels slowly begin to stack, until the hunter finally surpasses the prey in this deadly game of survival. Zachary Atwood hits level 23, but he knows the clock is ticking. With less than 5 days left before the month wraps up for good, deep inside a dimly lit study, someone sits alone amidst scattered reports. Agraz enters the room to check on his superior's progress. Finding Rydell swirling a glass of wine while asking for an update on the incursion, who immediately fires back a snarky reminder that reports are meant to be read, Rydell laughs off the attitude and gestures for his second-in-command to move closer. Though Agraz keeps his distance and stands his ground by the desk, clearly unimpressed by the state of his leader, Agraz questions if he's been drinking again, while Rydell groans off the accusation and claims there is nothing better to do. Pushing a document across the table for signature so he can return to his glass, Agraz signs off on the appointment of Rydell's cousin as the new Master of Scouts, promising that the orders will be carried out without a single delay. Satisfied with the loyalty, Rydell takes another drink and dismisses his subordinate, musing on how he only has a few weeks left until he can escape this den out in the wild. A hand brushes against the rough, rocky ground. Zachary Atwood checks the terrain with a focused, steady hand, tracking the massive barghest prowling through the dark woods nearby, hunkered down and staying perfectly downwind. He readies his heavy axe for the strike, waiting for the perfect opening before the beast can sense his presence. Zachary Atwood barely dodges the incoming strike, his eyes wide in sudden realization as the barghest tears into the brush where he was just hiding seconds ago. Breaths ragged and chest heaving, he presses his back against the earth to stay concealed. The massive predator continues to mangle the clearing with terrifying, primal strength, sniffing the air with predatory intent. The beast scans the immediate area for any trace, tearing through the foliage. It crushes everything in its path, teeth bared and eyes locked on the darkness. It charges toward his location, hungry for a kill. The creature closes the distance with lethal speed. Scanning the woods once more, it pauses for a fraction of a second. Panic surges through Zachary Atwood as he recognizes the creature is not a mere beast. Vaulting away from the encounter, he realizes this monstrosity is far beyond his current level, retreating toward the campsite. He understands that brute force will not be enough to survive. Arrival at the edge of the camp brings a new, unexpected sight. An imp sits by the fire, speaking in an unknown tongue to a red-scaled demon. Hiding behind a thick tree, Zachary Atwood watches the strange exchange with growing alarm, noting the imp's intelligence. He realizes these creatures are far more organized than mindless monsters. Wondering if they were sent to track his location, he weighs the implications of their presence, activating his ocular ability. He focuses on the pair to extract their hidden data. System notifications flood his vision, identifying the imp and demon as scouts of the Azrazak clan. Discovery of his presence forces him to rethink his strategy before they can alert the others. The imp launches a violet energy bolt, forcing Zachary Atwood to react instantly, blocking the magic with his hatchet. He feels the sheer force of the impact, cursing the sudden escalation. He realizes there is no room for error here. Swinging the weapon with everything he has, he deflects the blast. Redirection of the energy leaves him reeling, but he refuses to back down. Gritting his teeth, Zachary Atwood prepares for the demon scout to charge, lunging forward with a spear. The red-scaled demon forces him into a desperate struggle, slamming his weight into the creature. He tries to create some breathing room, snapping its jaws inches from his face. The demon refuses to let up, kicking the beast away. Zachary Atwood creates a vital window to recover, shaking off the lingering heat on his arm. He stares at the smoldering wound. Despite the graze, the lingering damage feels like a curse on his very soul, noting the imp moving in for another strike. He understands the threat is twofold. The demon recovers instantly, eyes locked on its prey with predatory focus. Staring at his damaged hatchet, Zachary Atwood realizes he is severely outmatched. Grinning through the pain, he decides to bet everything on his own survival instinct, reaching out toward the enemy. He channels his remaining energy for a final gambit. The imp unleashes a barrage of projectiles, lighting up the dark forest. Dodging through the chaos, Zachary Atwood closes the gap with lethal intent. Leaping toward the demon, he commits to a strike that will decide his fate. Zachary Atwood slams into the demon, their momentum locking them into a brutal grapple. Fangs sink deep into his shoulder, but he refuses to back down from the carnage, slamming his heel into the dirt. He forces the beast into a defensive position. Unleashing a flurry of strikes, Zachary Atwood breaks through the demon's guard with pure ferocity. Putting every ounce of his remaining strength into a final lunging charge, tearing through the creature's defenses, he lands a devastating blow that sends them both reeling, staggering back from the impact. He prepares for the next phase of this lethal dance. Watching the enemy loom large, he prepares to face the darkness head-on. Explosive energy erupts from his own body, catching the demon completely off guard. Gasping for air, he realizes the sheer scale of the power he has just unlocked. Surges of violet light tear through the air, consuming the area in raw arcane force. Staring at the shifting system digits, he acknowledges that his survival was far from guaranteed. Seizing the initiative, he channels the swirling cosmic energy directly into his palm. Ancient particles coalesce into a singular, blinding point of celestial power. This fundamental building block of the multiverse begins to resonate with his very soul. Ever since the system arrived, he has been an unwitting vessel for this cosmic force, feeling the weight of the energy he has carried since his first kill. The gathering array finally teaches him how to harness what was always dormant inside. Mastering this newfound control, he prepares to unleash the true extent of his potential. Wilgie recoils as Zachary Atwood channels the full, blinding intensity of the cosmic core. Zachary Atwood stares down his enemy, his eyes burning with the raw intensity of his new power. Vowing retribution for his shattered weapon, he grips the remains of his gear with lethal intent. The demon scout steps forward, clearly rattled by the sudden spike in Zachary's aura. Shrieking in a desperate bid to regain control, the creature prepares a counterattack. Energy projectiles fill the air as the demon launches a flurry of purple fire. Ducking under the barrage, Zachary Atwood pivots to maintain his momentum, whipping his blade through the air. He cleaves through the incoming magical volley. Blood sprays as the strike connects, marking the end of the demon's short-lived resistance. One final look of terror crosses the creature's face, before the cosmic energy obliterates what remains of its physical form. Day 30 marks the end of the first month, leaving the forest quiet and still. Ripples disturb the water at the base of the cliffs, where the remains of his opponent now drift aimlessly in the shallows, washing away the last traces of the brutal encounter. Zachary Atwood pauses to inspect the makeshift weapon in his calloused hands, noting that his repairs will have to suffice for the time being. He reflects on the missed chance to hit level 25 before the month concluded. Though he knows that slowing down now is simply not an option, considering the rewards promised by the system, he weighs his next move. Setting his sights on the next herald, he prepares to hunt once more. Fingers tighten on the worn metallic surface, signaling the start of a new grim chapter. Rydell notes how quickly the first month evaporated. Acknowledging the heavy burden they've both been carrying, he reminds his companion that once the portal stabilizes, they are essentially on their own. Dark energy churns in the distance as the rift tears open. An army gathers beneath the crimson sky, eager for the slaughter ahead. Meanwhile, Zachary Atwood lunges forward with his makeshift axe raised. A snarling beast lashes out from the shadows. He barely manages to tumble clear, avoiding the creature's jagged claws. Sliding across the uneven forest floor to regain his footing, breaths coming in shallow gasps, he locks eyes with the monster. This level 45 threat looms over him, blocking his path forward. Shifting focus back to the serene lakeside, a very different kind of hunt unfolds. An older fisherman explains to the kid beside him that every creature has a unique weakness. The rod bends sharply as something bites. He complains about the slippery nature of the catch, explaining that true strength lies in outmaneuvering prey without relying on cheap tricks. Picking up a squirming worm, he demonstrates the raw approach, emphasizing that it's the ability to adapt and seize the moment that defines a predator. 2 hours before the showdown, Zack preps his gear, arming himself with a stash of makeshift spears, but the level 45 beast is already closing the distance, forcing him to realize that raw power will not cut it against this monster, because one clean hit from the Herald means instant game over, leaving Zack with only one viable strategy, dodging the lethal incoming swipes. And narrowly avoiding the creature's massive, dark claws as the beast tears through the trees behind him, he focuses his remaining cosmic energy into his limbs, bracing his body for the inevitable impact. The Herald charges forward with relentless, savage intent, baiting the creature into a narrow corridor, knowing that without the path of a traditional cultivator, his limited energy reserves are his only real resource. Every movement must be calculated to avoid fatal mistakes. Shouting to himself as he prepares for the final exchange, channeling all his focus to reinforce his physical defenses, he grips his heavy weapon for the desperate counter and drives it forward to meet the beast's lethal strike head-on. A massive void tears open at the gates, signaling the arrival of something truly dangerous, where the troops demand to know the location of Rydell, but the general confirms he has already entered the portal, leaving the soldiers with a grim realization that their mission has just changed, because no one is following him into that abyss. While a menacing presence watches the chaos unfold, far away, Zack struggles to maintain his pace through the woods, cursing as his own core begins to fracture under the strain. The raw cosmic energy is literally tearing his physical form apart. Yet the herald behind him shows no signs of slowing down, forcing Zack to push his breaking body toward the destination. The beast closes the gap with a terrifying, jagged grin, its heavy footsteps shaking the very ground he runs upon. Teeth grit in defiance despite the internal agony. Spikes erupt from the earth to obstruct the path, barely keeping the creature from tearing into his back. He executes a desperate high-speed turn to change the angle and launches himself into a final, reckless maneuver to survive. The creature lunges with lethal intent, its massive claws tearing through the air where Zack just stood breathless. Zack hopes his gamble actually paid off. A sudden piercing strike drives deep into the monster's skull, pinning the beast to the forest floor as it convulses. Dark energy swirls uncontrollably within its dying form. Notification chimes confirm the kill and a hard-earned level up. Watching the sparks dance across his palms, Zack realizes he finally hit the mark. Manic laughter erupts from him, pure adrenaline replacing the exhaustion, pointing toward the heavens. He screams his victory at the system, though the celebration is cut short by fresh, ominous presence. Glowing eyes watch from the shadows, marking the arrival of more trouble. Realizing he is not out of the woods yet, Zack curses his luck. An entire pack of predators emerges from the foliage to surround him. Dark, imposing ruins loom in the distance, setting the stage for the next shift. Inside the walls, a soldier desperately pleads for mercy, but a single, swift motion silences the man for good. The body hits the ground, cold and discarded. Armored figures patrol the area, cutting down anyone in their path. Their commander grows impatient, tired of hiding behind these pathetic disguises. Agras coldly silences his subordinate, making it clear that mercy is not part of the plan. The broken soldier on the ground struggles, unable to even lift a finger against such power. Leah tries to negotiate for herself, but she's just another target in this ruthless purge. Keeping his scheme secret is the priority, so Agras intends to hoard every advantage for himself, seizing the man by the throat. Agras chokes the life out of him without a second thought. Blood pools on the floor as the victim gasps his final, desperate breath, discarding the body like trash. Agras prepares to seal their path and isolate the group. Ilver accepts the grim reality, realizing there is no turning back from this betrayal. Cutting ties with his own clan, Agras decides that survival requires burning every bridge, prioritizing his own life over ancient loyalties. He prepares for the final, violent phase. A massive energy spike tears through the reality, signaling their move toward the new planet. Meanwhile, Zack is still sprinting through the forest, desperately trying to put distance between him and the predators. His stamina is bottoming out, and the pack is closing in faster than he can handle. Every heavy breath is a reminder that his reserves are nearly dry. Confusion fuels his frustration as he wonders why a herald was sent to hunt him down, power flickering out of his reach. Zack realizes he is burning through his last reserves of cosmic energy, sacrificing his remaining stability to finish the herald. He now has nothing left to fuel an escape. Claws tear into his defenses as the beasts force a desperate, close-quarters confrontation. Teeth snap at his throat, and the overwhelming numbers threaten to drag him under. Raising his blade for one last stand, Zack prepares to crack skulls before they finish him. Zack stumbles back, his breathing ragged as the pack of predators circles him, realizing that killing the Gwilgi actually restored a tiny trickle of his cosmic energy. He calculates the math of survival. If he can keep up this pace, he might just balance the cost. The ground shakes as the beasts lunge, but this time Zack stops his retreat, deciding to stop running and start hunting instead. A snarling predator closes the distance, teeth bared for the kill, but Zack swings his blade, cleaving through the beast in a single, fluid motion. Slaughtering the pack becomes his only objective to keep his energy levels afloat. Miles away, a massive red beam of energy pierces the sky, signaling a shift in the local power structure. Kevoran stares at the maps, declaring himself in command now that Agras has vanished, ordering scouting parties to investigate the anomaly that eliminated Herald Urkaz. His subordinates scramble to obey, sensing the instability in their ranks. Kevoran leans over the command table, obsessed with upgrading their defenses before the next crisis. A sudden alert breaks the tension as someone steps through their portal. A dark, armored figure emerges from the threshold, blade drawn. Kevoran watches as the intruder steps forward, radiating a familiar, lethal intent. The newcomer meets Kevoran's gaze, the air crackling with unspoken hostility. Back in the dark forest, Zack is barely holding it together, dragging his bloodied weapon through the dirt. He scans the shadows for more prey. Desperately searching for the next source of power to stay ahead of the abyss, Zack finally tracks down his hidden supply cache, littered with the carcasses of his recent kills. Hobbling through the dense brush, he spots the specific tree he was searching for, hauling his broken body up the trunk. He reaches for the supplies tucked away in the branches, collapsing into the foliage. He finally finds a moment of respite to assess his condition. Battered and exhausted, Zack realizes just how much his body has been pushed to the brink. Morning light filters through the canopy while birds chirp, signaling a new day. He watches the local wildlife, briefly reflecting on the sheer absurdity of his survival. Thinking back on the past month, he muses that the world essentially ended for him already. Looking toward the horizon, he spots that same massive energy beam still piercing the sky. Tightening the bandages on his arm, he prepares for the long trek ahead, marveling at his own rapid healing. He still knows he is far from being back at full power, setting his sights on home. He vows that picking his class is the priority once he arrives. Suddenly his senses sharpen as he detects an unfamiliar presence lurking nearby. A well-equipped, armored demon scout steps into the clearing, scanning the area with lethal intent. Watching from the bushes, Zack immediately recognizes the danger this new threat poses. Gritting his teeth, he curses under his breath at the sight of the demon. The scout kneels to inspect the ground, deciphering the trail Zack left behind. Muttering a name under his breath, the demon realizes exactly who he is hunting. Zack does not hesitate, lunging from the cover of the trees with his axe raised high. The strike connects with brutal force, catching the unsuspecting scout completely off guard. Zack snatches the scout's gear, wasting no time before hauling the captive into the shadows. Moving with practiced efficiency, he drags the unconscious demon deeper into the woods, dumping the prisoner in a clearing. He waits for the inevitable moment of recovery. Water splashes over the demon's face, forcing a sudden, gasping return to consciousness. Groggy and disoriented, the captive calls out for his comrade Vale. Panic sets in as he realizes his hands are bound and a blade is inches from his throat. Zack greets him with a cold smirk, making it clear who is in control now. Demanding to know the scale of the invasion, he looms over the terrified demon. The system reveals his name is Azan, a level 33 member of the Azure Zack clan. Losing patience with the silence, Zack slashes across the prisoner's arm to speed up the interrogation. Magical energy flares around Azan as he triggers a desperate, self-destructive countermeasure. Red light envelops the clearing, signaling that the demon is choosing suicide over betrayal. Screaming in agony, the scout accepts his fate as the energy reaches a critical mass. A massive explosion tears through the ground, forcing Zack to dive away from the blast. Flames consume the remains of the captive, leaving nothing but a smoldering crater behind. Scrambling to his feet, Zack watches the debris settle while questioning how a demon could harness such power. Frustration boils over as he realizes all that effort resulted in zero intel. Wiping blood from his hand, he notes that these invaders are going to be a massive headache. Retreating back into the dense forest, he puts distance between himself and the scene of the blast. Hours later, he finally stops to assess the situation, wondering if the coast is truly clear. Zack touches down on the forest floor, still annoyed that Azan turned into a firework, complaining about the lack of decent loot. He laments the state of his current gear. Kicking through the dirt, he wishes he had checked the demon for supplies before the detonation. Reflecting on the blast, Zack recalls how quickly that scout went from interrogation to kamikaze. The memory of that crimson explosion still lingers, but he pushes the irritation aside. Inspecting his new prize, he notes the axe is a massive upgrade over his beat-up starter weapon. Feeling the weight of the steel, he realizes his equipment situation is finally looking up. Checking his status screen, he sees he finally hit level 25 after that messy encounter, putting the level-up celebration on hold. He remembers a crucial task waiting back at his base, opening the system interface. He selects the F-grade small-scale illusion array he purchased. Watching as the device materializes, he inspects the physical casing of the deployment kit. Popping the latches, he pulls out the glowing stabilizers, noting they look nothing like his previous gear. Walking to the perimeter of his camp, he starts the installation process with the first rod, securing the final component into the soil. He prepares the array for immediate deployment. Standing back to observe, he initiates the activation sequence for the defensive perimeter. Energy pulses through the rods as the field begins to ripple and expand outward. Violet light surges across the clearing, warping the space around his hidden sanctuary. Watching the barrier solidify, he confirms the F-grade illusion array is now fully operational. Reaching out to touch the shimmering air, he marvels at how effectively the dome cloaks his location. Satisfied that his camp is finally secure, he plans to stay one step ahead of the demon clan. Turning his attention back to the system, Zack realizes the time has finally arrived to pick his class. A holographic prompt confirms he has met the requirements. Unlocking the selection menu for his path forward, dragging the window into view, he prepares to finalize the choice that defines his future survival. Immediate frustration hits when a surprise paywall demands 6,000 Nexus coins just to access the selection interface, cursing the system's greed. He resents having to burn through the hard-earned currency he scavenged from the Herald. Biting the bullet, he taps the confirm button while hoping this transaction does not broadcast his coordinates to enemies. A heavy thud sounds as the required Nexus node materializes on the ground, glowing with a pulsing energy. Leaning in to inspect the mysterious device, he wonders if this is meant to be a permanent home base anchor. Resting his hand on the node, he feels the interface respond as it syncs with the system, watching the light intensify. He waits for the long-awaited class list to finally populate on his screen. Squinting at the display, he sees the notification ping that 5 distinct options are now available for review. A grin spreads across his face as he realizes the grind was actually worth the payoff. Scanning the first entry, he notes the fighter class offers solid melee potential but feels a bit too basic. Shifting his gaze, he examines the Acolyte option, though he is not exactly sold on a pure elemental magic build, skipping over the Marine class. He figures naval combatant traits are useless while he is stuck in this forest. Pausing on the Demon Hunter, he considers the irony of specializing in the exact monsters currently hunting him. Checking the final option, he finds the Hatchetman class, a rare choice that pairs perfectly with his current gear. Weighing his options, he debates whether to stick with the common classes or gamble on something more specialized. Realizing these choices are all upgradable, he understands that his long-term potential depends on this single decision, tossing aside the generic paths. He narrows his focus toward the build that offers him the most tactical advantage. Zack worries that picking the Demon Hunter class might pigeonhole him into a specific enemy type. He is not looking to be a one-trick pony when survival is on the line. Instead, he wants a versatile build that can handle anything the system throws his way. Moving on from the Marine class, he knows a naval specialty is useless in this landlocked hellscape. Since he refuses to limit himself to water-based combat, only one viable path remains. The Hatchetman class promises to be a worthy reward for all the risks he's taken. Worrying about an axe-only restriction turns out to be a non-issue. He actually loves the idea, gripping the system crystal. He prepares to finalize his choice once and for all. Selecting the rare Hatchetman class triggers an intense surge of energy throughout his body. His eyes flare with a new, dangerous intensity as the system confirms his selection. Multiple notifications flood his vision, rewarding him for being the first player in the world to reach this milestone. Golden rings of power begin to orbit him, signaling a massive shift in his physical capabilities. The sheer output of energy crackles around his frame, forcing him to brace for the transformation. System messages rapidly highlight a across-the-board increase in every single one of his core attributes, gasping for air. He tries to steady himself as the overwhelming power settles into his muscles. Realizing he's officially the first person on Earth to attain a class, he smirks at the sheer absurdity. Pulling up his new status screen, he sees his stats have spiked to levels he could not have imagined, noting a massive 28-point boost to his strength alone. He starts to feel the difference. Flexing his arm, he watches the golden sparks dance over his skin as he tests his new strength. Everything has changed now that he has officially transitioned into his new class. Zack reviews the brutal grind ahead to unlock his new Hatchetman skills. Noting that nothing ever comes easy, he grips his weapon and prepares to get to work. Refocusing his energy, he vows to show the invading demon forces exactly who they are dealing with. Meanwhile, the Azrazak clan surveys the island with utter disdain for the incompetence of their commander. Agraz, a high-ranking demon, reclines in luxury, mocking the decision to lead with a wave of cannon fodder beasts. Viewing the initial assault as a cowardly tactic, he dismisses the low-level monsters as a waste of time. Zack begins his repetitive training, slamming his blade into timber to satisfy the system's strange requirements. The forest around him seems far too peaceful, offering no real challenge to his newfound power. Back at the clan headquarters, leadership assumes their scouts Vul and Urk has already cleared the area. They lament the wasted month spent on these minor skirmishes, while more significant threats loom elsewhere. Elsewhere, the demon hierarchy remains blinded by their own arrogance and perceived divine favor. Medici smirks at the thought of their supposed blessings. Unaware of the reality on the ground, reports finally start trickling in from his scouts stationed across the island. They have uncovered a massive nexus crystal hidden deep within the mountain range. Its value is astronomical, capable of dwarfing the entire treasury of the clan elders. Medici revels in the discovery, already planning to keep this fortune entirely for himself. Greed glints in his eyes as he confirms that this treasure will never reach his superiors. He summons his subordinates, Medici calling out to his loyal servant to finalize their hidden agenda. Kayla approaches him, still acclimating to the alien climate of this new world. She confirms the setup is complete, setting the stage for their secret operation to begin. Medici invites Kayla to sit, dropping the formal act to keep her close. Kevorin arrives, questioning why a commander would be lounging around during an active incursion. Dismissing the concern, Medici pours himself a drink and insists that he always makes time for his priorities. His mood sours instantly when a common housefly ruins the pristine meal he had prepared. Snapping at his subordinate Gormer, Medici demands the pest be dealt with immediately. Irritation boils over as he waits for a response from his guard. Gormer fails to answer, instead collapsing as a native warrior lunges from the shadows. Blood sprays across the table as the unexpected assassin strikes with lethal precision. Kayla draws her weapon instantly while Medici summons a blade of raw energy to defend himself. The native warrior parries the initial strike, driving a blade toward the demon's vitals. Dodging the counter, the native continues his relentless assault against the two demons. Weapons clash in a blur of steel as the fight spills across the room. Medici swings his heavy blade, testing the raw strength of his uninvited guest. Sparks shower the area as their blades lock in a display of pure power. Grinding metal echoes through the chamber, marking a dangerous shift in the battle's momentum. Medici grins, realizing this human is a far more capable threat than he originally anticipated. Pressure mounts as the native pushes back, forcing the demon to put his weight into the struggle, straining against the superior strength of his opponent. The human refuses to yield an inch. Medici roars in frustration, desperate to break the deadlock and reclaim control of the fight. The demon commander unleashes a vicious swing, finally forcing the native to retreat for a moment. The native warrior lands a brutal strike, catching Medicis off guard with a shockwave of raw power, tearing through the ground as the demon commander is sent sprawling across the chamber floor. Steel carves a deep trench into the earth where the demon stood only a heartbeat ago. Panic flickers in Medicis' eyes as he realizes the sheer lethality behind his opponent's movements. Gripping his weapon tight, the demon channels dark energy to stabilize his footing. Shadows coil around the blade, pulsing with a lethal intent to end this fight immediately, teeth grit in agony. Yet the human refuses to let the overwhelming pressure break his resolve. A projectile pierces his guard, biting deep into his shoulder and painting the ground with blood, breath coming in ragged gasps. The scout ignores the burning pain to keep his eyes on his target. Medicis charges with a final, desperate roar intent on crushing the human once and for all. Focus narrows to the tip of the demon's blade as the gap between them vanishes. Steel meets steel in a violent collision that forces the human back onto his heels. Disbelief washes over the demon commander as his supposedly superior strength is countered with ease, lunging forward with desperate speed. The scout recovers his footing to turn the tables. A heavy blow lands squarely against Medicis' jaw, sending the demon reeling from the impact. Steel flashes in the dim light, catching the demon off balance as he stumbles backward. Blades dance in a frantic rhythm, carving through the air as the human presses the attack. Cold calculation replaces the chaos in the scout's eyes. Spotting the opening he needs, metal slices through the air, drawing a line of crimson across the demon's defenses. Leaping into the fray, the human commits to a final strike that could turn the tide of this war. Wiping away the blood with a steady hand, the warrior refuses to back down, facing the towering demon commander across the battlefield. Tension coils in the air, shifting his weight to compensate for the injury. He maintains a defensive stance. Medicis surges forward with crackling energy, openly mocking the human's fragile endurance, glowing eyes burning with malice. The demon sneers at the scout's tenacity. Labeling him nothing more than trash, Medicis recounts the long history of those deemed too weak to ascend, comparing his opponent to a persistent gnat. The demon dismisses the human's struggle, hefting a massive, heavy axe. Medicis prepares to crush the resistance once and for all, acknowledging the human's unnatural drive. The commander admits the heavens themselves might notice such defiance. System numbers flash in the air as the scout readies his next calculated move. Labeled a defier by the world, he remains unfazed by the demon's condescending remarks. Sensing the hidden growth within his prey, Medicis finds the scout's potential both impressive and regrettable. Dark energy pulses as the demon laments the necessity of ending such a promising life. Blurring across the ground, the commander launches a lethal strike that barely misses its mark. Narrowly rolling under the blade, the scout forces his body into a desperate counterposition. Metal shrieks against mystical plating as the scout tries to force an opening. Sparks fly in a blinding burst of light, momentarily masking the intensity of the struggle, unleashing a shockwave that rocks the immediate area. The human pushes his strength to the limit, standing perfectly intact after the blast. Medicis reveals his armor is far from ordinary, realizing the demon's gear redirected the entire kinetic force. The scout calculates the odds of winning. Medicis swings down with lethal intent, but the scout pivots just in time to avoid the blow, catching the demon off guard. The human slams a heavy strike directly into the commander's midsection. Blood spills from the demon's lip as he stares in disbelief at the sudden turn of events. Stumbling back from the impact, Medicis watches his own gear shatter under the sheer force of the blow. Fury consumes the demon as he realizes his defensive edge has finally been compromised. Closing the gap in a heartbeat, the scout lunges forward to press his newfound advantage. Metallic blades tear through the air as the human unleashes a flurry of relentless attacks. Kayla screams a warning to the commander, desperate to stop the momentum shifting against them. Debris flies as the chaotic exchange forces the demon onto the defensive, barking orders at his subordinate. Medicis struggles to regain control of the crumbling duel. Ignoring the command, the human weaves through the chaos to land another punishing hit. Realization dawning on the demon, he finally understands the scout is playing for keeps. Another massive strike lands, driving the commander deeper into the churned-up earth, dodging a desperate retaliatory swipe. The scout maintains his aggressive rhythm without pause. Collision sounds ring out as the two fighters lock into a brutal physical struggle. Hands locked against each other, the human forces his way into the commander's space, grabbing the demon by the throat. The scout starts to crush the life from his opponent, fingers digging into his own neck. Medicis tries to break the suffocating iron grip, screaming for backup. The demon demands Kayla intervene before the stalemate becomes a death sentence. Steel flashes in the distance as the subordinate prepares to join the fray with a lethal strike. The scout drives his blade deep into Medicis, ending the commander's resistance once and for all, clutching his throat in a final, desperate struggle for air. The demon fades fast, blood masking his vision. Medicis tries to laugh off the defeat even as his life drains away. Black energy surges from the wound, but it cannot stop the inevitable end of the commander. His grip on the weapon slackens as the life force completely abandons the demon's body. Taunting his dying foe, the scout twists the blade to ensure no recovery is possible. Metal meets the earth as the scout retrieves his weapon from the fallen commander. Medicis collapses into the dust, his arrogance shattered by the brutal reality of the duel. Crunching bone signals the final blow, followed by system notification confirming the scout's level up. Catching his breath, the exhausted scout barely manages to stay upright after the lethal exchange. Grit and determination keep him moving despite the heavy toll of the previous fight. Kayla steps into view with bow drawn, warning the scout to freeze where he stands. Distance provides no safety as the archer tracks the injured human across the desolate landscape. An arrow whistles through the air and strikes the scout, forcing a painful grunt from him. Reeling from the impact, the scout struggles to maintain his focus while enduring the wound. Vengeance drives Kayla, who vows to make the human pay for Kevoran's death. Steeling himself for another round, the scout refuses to back down regardless of his injuries. Lying defeated in the dirt, Medicis remains a silent witness to the ongoing confrontation, scavenging the fallen demon's belongings. The scout quickly searches for any useful supplies, weighing a mysterious pouch in his hand. He notes an unusual heaviness that hints at hidden value. Yanking the drawstrings tight, the scout peers inside to see what the commander was hoarding. Everything from kitchenware to fruit spills out as he realizes the bag is a glorified pantry. Baffled by the useless clutter, he wonders if Medicis was planning a picnic instead of a war. Shimmering shards catch his eye next. Pulsing with an energy that demands his immediate attention, identifying them as F-grade Nexus crystals, the system explains their utility for rapid recovery and strength. Clutching the glowing stone like a miniature sun, he feels the raw power seeping into his weary body. Checking his active quests, he sees the rewards for conquering the incursion include more of these crystals. Absorbing the energy helps, but he knows these low-tier shards are just a drop in the bucket. 30 minutes pass while he patches his armor and prepares to move out once again. Tightening the pouch at his side, he secures the remaining supplies for the long road ahead. Smirking at the discarded equipment, he mocks the fallen commander for carrying such pathetic gear. Discarding the enemy's sword, he finds the blade completely useless for his own combat needs. Glancing back at the corpse, he declares that he has no use for the demon's tools or friends. Tossing the weapon aside, he focuses on the next phase of his grim mission. Another system notification pings, confirming he is making steady progress toward his primary objectives. Reviewing the kill count for the incursion, he notes 2 of the 4 heralds are down. Wondering about his priorities, he questions if the incursion master needs to fall before the rest. Checking his secondary skills, he sees the requirements for mastery still demand a mountain of grinding. Sighing at the long road ahead, he realizes the Imp Herald and the final boss still remain. Trudging away from the battlefield, he leaves the dead behind to hunt the remaining targets alone. Disappearing into the dense forest, he realizes the path forward is already narrowing down. Staring ahead with intense focus, he sets his sights on the incursion general. A massive beam of light pierces the sky as he witnesses the chaos unfolding at the gates. Soldiers scramble to find cover while the demonic forces tear through their defensive line. Panicked whispers echo across the perimeter, but there is no time to analyze the threat. Survivors dash through the shadows, desperately trying to escape the slaughter happening in the courtyard. One of the soldiers abruptly halts his retreat, scanning the ruins for any sign of safety. Realizing the depth of the betrayal, he stares in disbelief at the destruction of his post. Broken weapons and fallen comrades litter the ground, painting a grim picture of the ongoing assault. Catching his breath under the cover of trees, he checks his status and the mounting kill count. Brute force will not work against the incursion general, so he starts weighing his limited options. Kicking down the front gate is a suicide mission that would leave him completely exposed. Sneaking past the perimeter is equally impossible given the sheer number of guards patrolling the island. Watching their movements from afar, he notices their strange labor patterns near the mountain cave. Speculating on their true objective, he wonders why they are building fortifications in this sector. Initially dismissing them as mere game NPCs, he now understands they are sentient living threats. Questioning their motivations, he realizes they are not just here to play by the system's rules. Shaking off the existential dread, he hardens his resolve and prepares for the coming fight. These invaders have turned his home into a battlefield, and he intends to reclaim it. Clutching his weapon, he refuses to back down until he finds the truth behind the defier. Willing to sacrifice whatever it takes, he commits to his ruthless new strategy. Targeting the 2 remaining heralds becomes his absolute top priority. Finishing them off clears the way to finally face the general himself. Reality bites back hard when the hunt turns into a grueling search. Scouring the landscape for hours, he watches his axe mastery skills slowly climb, trekking from the island's jagged edges to the deepest, darkest waters. Exploring every cramped, dead-end cave system without finding a single trace, straining his body to scale the sheer rock faces, he refuses to give up. Scanning the horizon from the highest peak, he realizes he missed something obvious. Taking a second to regroup, he spots a faint, suspicious energy signature. Locking onto that pulse with precision, he identifies the exact location of his prey. Narrowing his eyes at the tree line, he senses something watching from above. Perched high in the branches, the creature reveals itself as an oar, calling out to the beast. He demands to know exactly what it is. Activating the Eye of Discernment, he confirms it is a stone monkey of Clan Azurzak. Closing the gap at last, he realizes the final 2 targets were hidden in plain sight. Roaring with primal fury, the stone monkey prepares to launch a lethal counterattack. Lunging through the air with terrifying speed, the beast closes the distance instantly. Bracing for the impact, he shifts his grip to meet the incoming strike. Swinging his blade with perfect timing, he carves through the charging monster's defense. The scout cleaves the stone monkey in 2, raking in a massive coin bonus. Realizing these creatures rarely leave their territory, he prepares to venture deeper into the mountains. Another screech echoes through the trees, snapping his focus back to the immediate threat. Spotting a second stone monkey closing in, he readies his axe for another round. The beast charges with raw, volcanic intensity, forcing him to keep his guard up. Taunting the ape, he steels himself to test his limits against the encroaching swarm. Relentless waves of monsters descend upon him, turning the mountain pass into a chaotic meat grinder. Fighting for his life, he reflects on the endless struggle that has consumed his existence. His axe mastery inches closer to the cap as he carves a path through the stone ranks. Memories of his lost world and missing family surface, fueling his desperate need for answers. Parrying a massive blow, he continues his brutal climb toward total weapon proficiency. Each strike brings clarity, turning his confusion into a cold, singular focus on the objective. Weaving through the rubble, he dismantles the stone guardians with practiced, lethal efficiency. Every enemy falling to his axe feels like peeling back another layer of this twisted reality. His mastery nears its peak, the system notifications blurring as the combat intensifies, closing in on the final threshold. He begins to grasp the true nature of his predicament. Vaulting over the shattered remains of his foes, he treats the endless forest as his own personal woodshed. Hitting the 1,000 mark, he accepts his role as the ultimate lumberjack in this hostile expanse. Suddenly the battlefield shifts, revealing a strange, ethereal castle looming in the distance. Staring at the vision, he wonders if he has finally found the core of this system. The scout stares down a literal legion of stone warriors, before a new challenger emerges from the ranks with terrifying speed. Recognizing the sheer pressure radiating from this mysterious fighter, he braces for an encounter with someone whose origins are a total mystery. Blood spills as the intensity of the standoff begins to take its toll. The stranger raises his blade, channeling energy that hums with raw, volatile power, unleashing a focused strike that tears through the fabric of the immediate area. The impact ripples outward, shattering the ground beneath their feet. Absorbing the shockwave, he realizes this opponent is leagues beyond the monkey mobs. Parrying the follow-up blow, he finds his own movements pushed to the absolute limit. Suddenly a system prompt flashes, confirming he has unlocked a new Dao seed. Gravity itself seems to bend as the weight of the technique takes hold. Catching his breath, he surveys the wreckage left by that single, crushing blow. Retreating to the treeline, he watches the battlefield change under the influence of this power, wondering if this Dao concept is tied to the ancient mythologies he once knew, gaining a permanent boost to his strength and endurance stats. Clutching his axe, he tries to process whether the vision was truly real. Gripping the handle tight, he resolves to master this new, heavy style, acknowledging that he has caught a glimpse of a deeper, fundamental truth, and realizing that the weight in his swings is finally becoming a lethal reality. Focusing on the Dao seed, he forces every ounce of focus into his next strike. The blade cleaves through the air, dragging the very atmosphere along with it. Solid rock shatters like glass under the crushing force of his new technique. Gasping for air, he realizes that raw power was not the only secret behind that warrior's move. A deeper, more profound layer of energy still eludes his grasp. Reflecting on that encounter, he wonders if he can truly replicate such mastery. Remembering the monk, he questions how anyone could reach such a terrifying level. A sudden system notification confirms he is only the third person to ever attain a Dao seed. Realizing he is not alone in this progression, he starts to question his own standing elsewhere. Survivors are already beginning to adapt to the brutal new reality of the world. Even as the tutorial concludes, the race for cultivation superiority is just warming up. Government officials scramble behind desks, struggling to manage the chaos of a collapsing civilization. Feeling the sting of his first true defeat, he realizes how far he has yet to go. Checking his updated status board, he sees the stat gains but remains hungry for more. Pushing his physical limits is no longer an option. It is a basic necessity. Noticing a quest notification, he sees the progress on his hatchet mastery is nearing completion. Resting for a moment, he prepares for whatever fresh hell this island throws next. Deep within a distant, shadowed keep, news of a death reaches the ears of the court. The horned noble narrows his eyes, clearly unsettled by the mention of the fallen. Confirmation arrives that Kevoran has been eliminated by the same force that took out Vul and Urkaz. Ilver brushes off the reports of his scouts, convinced that a tiny elite force is behind the recent chaos. Despite his clear internal struggle with a persistent cough, he finds the situation hilariously convenient. He dismisses the physical toll on his own body as mere allergies, still mourning the loss of his spy Kayla. Instead of taking the threat seriously, Ilver orders his subordinates to deploy reinforcements to Cindermain and Quigo, banking on his plan to let the locals finish each other off. He prepares to sit back and watch the carnage. His armored guard offers a rare word of caution, but Ilver snaps back, clearly losing his grip on his composure. Miles away from the intrigue, Rydell focuses entirely on the grueling grind of his training regimen, wiping sweat from his brow. He checks the system notification as the final count approaches. Gripping the handle of his weapon with renewed intensity, he prepares for the last strike. A massive surge of energy erupts as he swings, finally hitting the 10,000 chop milestone. His hatchet glows with a newfound lethal potential, signaling a breakthrough in his mastery. Reaching out to steady himself, he can feel the raw power humming through his fingertips. The static discharge from his latest upgrade crackles into the very air around him. Sensing something shifting in the distance, he turns his gaze toward the horizon. A sudden hostile presence forces him to snap his attention toward the encroaching threat. Hordes of snarling, mutated monsters swarm up the cliffs, clearly tracking his location. Instead of retreating, Rydell tightens his resolve, recognizing these creatures as the perfect test for his new stats. Clutching his shimmering weapon, he prepares to unleash the full extent of his training. The swarm lunges in a coordinated wave, but he stands his ground in the center of the storm, ready to carve a path through the opposition. He readies his blade for the first strike of the real battle. Rydell channels every ounce of his new mastery into a single, decisive chop. The charged hatchet cleaves through the air with enough force to warp the atmosphere. Crackling energy arcs off the blade as he carves a massive trajectory through the swarm. Cutting through the front line of incoming monsters like they're made of paper, scanning the rugged terrain, he reflects on the strange secrets these mountains have kept hidden. Realizing his intuition about the peaks was spot on all along, cosmic energy grows increasingly dense the higher he ascends these jagged cliffs. Stone-skinned beasts patrol the slopes with a discipline he has not seen before, noting how their pack behavior mirrors the lesser demons he fought on the island. Commanders lead these groups, keeping their forces tightly coordinated and hypervigilant. A larger, more formidable monkey sniffs the air, detecting a scent that should not be here despite their size and strength. None of these creatures pose a genuine threat to Rydell anymore. Days turn into a grueling marathon of climbing through these treacherous, high-altitude ranges. Scanning every inch of the summit, he comes to the bitter conclusion that he's found nothing. Searching for a trace of the herald feels like a complete dead end. A sudden realization shifts his focus toward a voice echoing from below. Rydell spots a distant, solitary figure standing near a lone tree in the valley, stepping down toward the lowlands. He tracks the mysterious person with narrowed eyes, locking onto the target. Rydell recognizes the herald waiting patiently for his arrival, calling out to the herald. He finally forces the long-awaited confrontation to begin. Rydell stares at the warped landscape, wondering what kind of chaos unfolded here. The massive tree at the center pulses with an unnatural, eerie light stepping out from the shadows. The Cindermane stone monkey herald reveals himself, glowing eyes lock onto Rydell with predatory intensity. A brutal collision erupts as Rydell swings his blade against the creature's ironclad grip. Metal grinds against bone, neither fighter backing down an inch. Rydell pushes hard, testing the resilience of his opponent's defenses. The herald counters, pinning the weapon in place with raw, concentrated power. Blinding energy flares from the herald's core, surging through their locked weapons. Electricity crackles along the blade, threatening to overwhelm Rydell's guard. Sparks shower the ground as the strain pushes Rydell to his limit. With a sudden heave, the herald sends Rydell flying backward. Shockwaves ripple through the valley, tearing up the earth from the force of the blast. Rydell recovers his footing, realizing just how dangerous this herald truly is. Feeling the surge of his own growth, he tightens his grip on his axe. The herald sneers, dismissing Rydell's strength as insufficient for a real challenge. Closing the distance, the creature advances with rhythmic, menacing steps. Lunging forward, Rydell initiates a high-speed strike to regain the momentum. The herald reaches out, channeling a massive burst of lightning to crush the incoming attack. An explosive tremor shakes the entire battlefield as their powers collide once more. The rocky terrain shatters under the sheer pressure of the herald's defensive surge. Rydell carves a path through the debris with a precision strike, eyes locked on his target. He ignores the mounting fatigue and channels his focus. Gravity bends as Rydell vaults off the cliffside to rain down a crushing blow. Slashing through the air, he forces the herald to abandon its offensive stance. Bracing against the impact, Rydell pours his remaining strength into the axe head. The weapon connects with the herald's reinforced hide, sparking a violent discharge of power. Screeching in agony, the herald reels from the unexpected depth of the cut. Blood sprays across the battlefield as Rydell keeps the pressure relentless and unyielding. Forced to retreat, the herald positions itself between Rydell and the ancient, twisted tree. Sliding across the uneven ground, Rydell tracks the creature's desperate defensive pattern, closing the gap with a burst of speed. He prepares to shatter the herald's guard. Realization hits as Rydell notes the creature's singular focus on protecting the tree, taunting the beast. He makes it clear that the tree is his primary objective. Launching a ferocious assault, Rydell drives the herald backward toward the trunk. Metal meets flesh in a brutal collision that sends shockwaves through the immediate area. Capitalizing on the opening, Rydell swings with everything he has left to finish the job, grabbing the blade with its bare hands. The herald refuses to let him strike the tree. Metal screeches against bone while the herald's grip holds firm despite the lacerations. Rydell watches the creature's fanatical sacrifice, ready to capitalize on the herald's ultimate desperation. Rydell delivers a savage blow, forcing the herald to bear the brunt of his full strength. Muscle fibers strain and snap as the creature absorbs the impact to protect the tree, throwing the herald back. Rydell watches the beast cling to the target with pure, unadulterated grit, realizing these stone monsters use that same piercing screech. He knows time is running out. Stone shatters against his own guard, forcing Rydell to sacrifice his momentum to stay alive. Tumbling across the jagged terrain, he loses his footing and the chance to land the killing blow. Standing in the aftermath, Rydell curses the missed opportunity that cost him his clear shot. Weighing the cost of retreat, he knows he cannot survive a second encounter with the herald alone. Returning to that swarm is a death sentence, with the horde currently closing the distance. Gritting his teeth, Rydell sheathes his weapon and prepares to abandon the fight. Looking back, he sees the herald standing firm among the reinforcements that have finally arrived. Turning away from the battlefield, Rydell begins a desperate sprint into the darkening woods. Moving as fast as his battered legs allow, he disappears into the shadows. Surviving these mountains feels impossible given the extent of his current injuries. Cosmic energy reserves are running dry, leaving him effectively defenseless against the encroaching pack. Thundering footsteps signal that the horde is already tracking his scent through the brush. Vanishing into a narrow cave entrance, he hopes to lose the pack in the twisting tunnels. Echoes of the pursuit grow louder as the stone monsters swarm the opening he just left. Clutching his weapon, Rydell knows he is walking into a potential death trap. Gambling everything on this reckless path, he decides to face the heralds on his own terms. Rydell realizes that taking down just the fourth herald will not be enough to turn the tide. A massive shockwave erupts as he unleashes his remaining power to blast through the tunnel wall. Debris rains down while the stone monsters outside scramble to close in on his position. Standing amidst the crumbling rock, he surveys the wreckage with a grim expression. Deep inside the cavern, he finds himself isolated with no clear path forward. Frustration mounts as he realizes that even at his peak strength he remains hopelessly outmatched. Steadying his grip, He scans the tunnel walls for any sign of a secret passage. Physical exhaustion pulls at his limbs, but he forces himself to keep moving forward, venturing further into the dark. He searches for a connection to the demon mines. Descending deeper into the mountain, he follows the faint trail of ambient energy. Blue luminescence begins to coat the cave floor as he moves deeper into the abyss. The air grows heavy with concentrated cosmic energy similar to the high mountain peaks. Studying a glowing fragment, he suspects the fourth herald is hiding somewhere nearby. Crossing the threshold into a hidden chamber, he scours the area for any missed clues. Sharp intuition kicks in when he senses a presence lurking in the shadows, stealthily making his way through the tight crawl space. He tracks a faint sound peeking around the jagged corner. He catches a glimpse of his target, spotting the small imp darting through the cave. He confirms his theory about the herald, following the creature silently. He waits for the perfect moment to launch an ambush. The imp keeps moving deeper, unaware that Rydell is closing the distance behind him. The imp clutches a handful of stolen Nexus crystals, and Rydell realizes the creature is actually hoarding them for some unknown purpose. This discovery changes everything for him because he knows he can simply track the energy signature back to the source. Launching himself forward to intercept the target, he watches the imp get snatched away by a territorial lizard in a split second, leaving Rydell completely dumbfounded by the sudden turn of events. The predator makes quick work of the imp, swallowing it whole while pulsating with dark energy. Before turning its hunger directly toward the intruder, Rydell delivers a clean, decisive strike that ends the creature's life, shaking off the annoyance as he stands over the carcass. He retrieves a discarded crystal from the nearby cluster, deciding to rely on the imp's original trail to find his way. Moving deeper into the tunnel system, he notes that the path is surprisingly easy to navigate. Finding the imp's lingering stench to be an unexpected navigational aid, suddenly a metallic ringing sound catches his attention, echoing from the deep reaches of the dark tunnels. He realizes the demon forces are actively mining the area. Rydell realizes the demons are mining precious Nexus crystals. Hearing a strange, rhythmic chanting echoing through the cave, he grips his weapon as the voices draw dangerously close, realizing there is absolutely nowhere to hide in these tunnels. Rydell steps carefully over the uneven, glowing cave floor, encountering two demonic laborers who are busy with their work. They gossip about a cruel overseer who keeps them in check. One of the laborers dismisses the danger with a cocky laugh, complaining about unfair accusations of skimming from their mining haul, leading his companion toward a fresh vein of crystals. Their conversation stops cold when they sense something wrong. Both demons tremble in fear as a lethal presence emerges. Rydell strikes with blinding speed before they can even react. Terror flashes across the laborer's face as he turns, scrambling to flee while Rydell closes the distance instantly, his eyes burning with intent as he hunts them down, crushing the ground beneath his boots in a sudden burst, delivering a brutal blow that stops the miner in his tracks, incapacitating the target with a clean, efficient follow-up strike, leaving the final demon hyperventilating as Rydell looms over him. Quago falls mid-sentence as the blade carves through him, leaving the demon slumped against the rock face, while Rydell steps out from the shadows of the mine, trying to reach for help before his strength fails completely. But Rydell executes the final strike with surgical precision, cleaning his weapon while checking that the perimeter is secure, satisfied that the alarm was never raised by the scouts, though the narrowness of the escape leaves him momentarily tense. Peering down into the cavern to see a massive swarm below, revealing a sprawling base filled with countless demonic laborers, where the local elites are already sensing an intruder's presence, and one of the gargoyle-like overseers spots the disruption, while Quago the level 44 elite cackles as he turns toward the threat, mocking the fourth herald as Rydell steps forward to engage, unleashing a surge of dark energy that crackles through the air, closing the gap with a lethal high-speed dash. Swinging his massive blade with devastating focused force, colliding head-on with Quago's raised shield in a shower of sparks, cracking the defensive barrier with the sheer weight of the impact as Rydell stares down his opponent ready to finish the fight. Rydell pivots with surgical precision, forcing his opponent into a corner, and Quago screams for backup, desperate to stop the momentum, but the herald is not holding back, driving his blade straight through the enemy's guard. While a wave of dark, volatile energy erupts from the point of contact, knocking the demonic guard backward as Rydell keeps the pressure locked, vaulting high into the air to deliver a crushing downward strike that sends a shockwave of purple flames tearing through the ranks, marking the battlefield with a fire that burns far hotter than standard magic, where the herald realizes these creatures are paper-thin once you close the distance. And he dives headfirst into the chaotic fray to exploit the opening, ignoring the searing heat licking at his heels as he sprints. Before leaping again to evade a massive, incoming overhead swing midair, he weaves through the lethal arc of the demon's weapon, moving with a reckless speed that borders on a death wish. Because Rydell knows the only path to victory is through the center of the storm, noticing a bubbling, noxious cauldron that seems to be the source of their power, which emanates a toxic vapor that makes even the air feel heavy and suffocating. So he channels his remaining energy into one final explosive detonation, tearing through the dense clouds of purple magic to reach his target, and disappearing into the heart of the blast to end this once and for all. Rydell realizes he's boxed in with no escape route as the demon intensifies the swirling vortex of dark energy, and the creature grins, clearly expecting the herald to meet his end. But a massive, blinding detonation erupts right in the center of the magic, catching the demon completely off guard as the smoke clears, because Rydell refuses to die and pushes forward through the inferno, recalling how the previous owner of this armor could parry any strike, and he realizes his breastplate possesses the same ability to redirect incoming force, which effectively allows him to turn the demon's own flames against the caster. So he surges upward, glowing with the absorbed power of the blast, and slams down a devastating counterattack that shatters the demon's composure, leaving Rydell bloodied and panting from the sheer strain of the technique. As the toxic, swirling smoke begins to cloud his senses and judgment, while the cauldron continues to fuel the enemy's dark, suffocating presence, and the demon desperately tries to keep the herald pinned down. But Rydell grips his weapon tight, refusing to let the exhaustion take him, roaring in defiance as he prepares for one final, desperate charge, pouring every last drop of his remaining strength into a single strike, and the demon screams in rage, realizing the human is still closing the distance, so Rydell launches himself through the air to finish the fight once and for all. The blade connects and cuts the demon down in a clean arc, dropping the creature to the ground as the system registers a level up, though Rydell is barely holding it together, coughing as the quest tracker updates to 3 out of 5. While nearby minions scramble to escape the heavy, toxic miasma filling the cavern, and Rydell realizes his own body is failing him under the sheer intensity of the gas, forcing him to target the source of the fumes if he wants to survive the mountain. So he channels his remaining energy into the cursed cauldron to neutralize the hazard, triggering a violent, swirling reaction that threatens to consume the entire area, forcing Rydell to push forward through the thick, glowing haze just to keep standing. But his legs give out as the nausea from the toxins finally takes hold, causing him to collapse as his body rejects the poisoned air, hitting the stone floor with a heavy thud that rings through the chamber. And he lies there fighting for consciousness as the world spins around him, struggling to draw a clean breath while his system works to process the damage, until he manages to drag himself up, fighting the urge to vomit once more, wondering if the herald's earlier actions were the cause of this lethal environment. But he wipes his mouth and refocuses, realizing he did not even touch the liquid that poisoned him, eyeing the cauldron now as his new prize, determined to make this nightmare pay off. So he begins the long trek toward the exit, knowing reinforcements might arrive at any moment, leaving behind the chaos as he steps out to find his next target. Rydell finds his previous kill exactly where he left it, and he downs a quick drink to wash away the lingering sickness, grateful that the path seems clear of any other hostiles for now, mentally thanking his armor for redirecting that lethal strike earlier, though he notes the fractal core is drained and recharges far too slowly, forcing him to rely on these limited cosmic crystals for a boost. And as the energy flows, he realizes he can't depend on them for a long fight, but at least the nausea is fading enough for him to move properly again, so he pulls up his status screen to assess his current standing, seeing his level is 34 with a massive pile of coins waiting to be spent, only to hit a brick wall when he tries to dump more points into strength. Wondering if he just hit a hard cap or some hidden restriction, especially when he knows he's fought enemies far stronger than this current limit, leaving him to guess whether his level, race, or class rank is to blame, and despite his F-rank status, he still has no idea how to actually evolve it, which only adds to his growing frustration with this convoluted system. Not to mention he can't even dump points into luck because of his titles, making him realize just how much this game loves to troll his progress, so he leaves the cavern behind, moving back into the mining tunnels where he finds a group of terrified workers shaking in fear over a missed quota. A group of armed guards stands watch as the warden approaches the miners, and the tension in the tunnel hits a breaking point immediately, with the terrified miners clutching their bags of ore, handing over their daily quota to the warden for inspection. While she meticulously counts the glowing crystals one by one, pouring them out to ensure nothing is being held back, then checking her records to see who met the requirements, but one miner falters while presenting his meager collection, so the warden shuts down his excuses by threatening the entire clan's standing, looming over him as she questions his loyalty to the cause, and she lifts his chin, demanding an explanation for the failure, forcing the desperate miner to beg for another chance on his knees. Yet the warden orders her guards to make him an example, so one guard draws his blade to carry out the execution, but he pauses when he catches a glimpse of movement nearby, spotting a sudden threat emerging from the depths of the mine, and chaos erupts as a pack of salamanders swarms the tunnel, forcing the warden to abandon the execution as the beasts attack, while the guards scramble to get the surviving miners to safety. As the warden prepares to defend her position against the incoming monsters, the herald watches the chaos from the shadows, finding the timing of the beast attack perfect for his own agenda, as he notes how taking out the warden would cripple the demon's entire mining operation, while his eyes lock onto the heavy bag filled with precious nexus crystals, so he decides to intervene and tip the scales in the salamander's favor, and a guard swings his blade to fend off a monster, only for his defense to crumble as the beast forces him back, while the herald readies himself to capitalize on the confusion and secure the loot, then leaps from his hidden vantage point straight into the fray, landing right in the middle of the warden's defensive line, where the warden spots the intruder and screams in pure fury, ordering her remaining guards to ignore the salamanders and focus entirely on killing him, so a guard charges the herald, closing the distance in a desperate strike. But the herald pivots with lethal precision, and his weapon carves through the guard's defenses in a single fluid motion, forcing the guard to drop his sword as his severed arm hits the ground, while the warden curses her subordinate's incompetence and steps forward to handle the threat herself, as she unleashes a surge of power that tears through the immediate area, and the herald narrowly avoids the incoming blast, spinning away from the destructive force, and slices through the final guard, blocking his path to the crystal bag. The warden lunges, her aura flaring as she prepares to crush the intruder, but the herald deflects the strike, forcing the energy to ripple back toward her, realizing instantly that she possesses the exact same defensive barrier tech as his own armor, so he braces for impact when his own redirected strike slams into his guard, cursing the realization that her ability turns his offensive momentum against him. Digging his heels into the shifting terrain to maintain his footing, while he struggles to find an opening without getting caught in the feedback loop. But the warden capitalizes on the distraction, landing a vicious, wounding strike, forcing the herald to grit his teeth against the sudden, sharp pain, as the momentum of the fight forces him to reset his position, shattering the space between them while dodging another wave of her concentrated power. Yet the encroaching vines begin to tighten their grip around his limbs, restricting his movement until he is completely pinned by the relentless magical growth, and the warden mocks him, identifying him as the thief targeting her precious crystal supply, promising that her subordinates will have a field day interrogating him once she is finished. Though the herald refuses to break, glaring back despite being bound in thorns, while she stands just out of reach, taunting his futile resistance. Until he suddenly triggers a hidden blade, launching a desperate pinpoint counterattack, catching the warden off guard as the blade grazes her, drawing blood, and he forces a momentary break in the vines, finally creating a sliver of space to retaliate. The herald lunges forward, slashing through the warden's defenses with lethal precision, and his blade connects, sending the warden crashing into the ground with a heavy thud. Shaking her to the core as she realizes this human possesses strength far beyond her expectations, because the brute force behind his strike proves he is no mere mortal, compelling the warden to acknowledge that his raw power rivals even her generals. So she decides he is too dangerous to let survive, channeling every ounce of her remaining energy into a massive, desperate blast for Azurzak, igniting the battlefield in a blinding flash of raw magic. Yet the resulting explosion only clears to reveal the herald standing ready to finish the job. Meanwhile, the herald catches his breath, noting that the nearby demon workers have already fled, realizing his stealth is officially dead and the tunnels will soon be swarming with reinforcements, so he abandons any pretense of subtlety to focus entirely on eliminating his final target, finding a silver lining in the chaos as he surveys the aftermath. And his hands reach into his satchel to pull out the prize he risked everything for, revealing the glowing Nexus crystal that marks his mission a success. Plus, he retrieves a piece of the warden's enchanted dress from the battlefield, discovering that the fabric is just as durable and reflective as his own armor, contemplating whether to put on the garment to gain its defensive properties, and deciding he has nothing to lose, he pulls the fabric over his gear. Accepting that if wearing this dress keeps him alive, he will wear it with pride. The herald checks his surroundings, hoping the path he cleared back through the cave remains empty. Then he pulls up a status screen, squinting at the sudden notification floating in front of him, reading the details of the Lomewalker's skill, which requires him to walk 1,000 kilometers across the earth, and he scoffs at the requirement, convinced that completing such a distance will be a walk in the park. Yet the system interrupts his confidence with a brand new, high-stakes dynamic quest, revealing a massive glowing landscape that seems to exist in a different plane of reality, where an ancient tree stands bathed in ethereal light, bearing the coveted fruit of Ascension, causing a sudden, jarring vision to snap into his mind with supernatural intensity, which leaves the herald gasping for air, shaken but more determined than ever to claim that prize. Deep in the distance, a mysterious figure stands before the same glowing tree surrounded by watchful beasts, while a brilliant beam of red light pierces the sky, signaling to everyone that the treasure has finally ripened. And far away, Cindermane reacts to the sudden flare of power with pure unadulterated rage, growling at the realization that the monkey he underestimated has been playing him for a fool as Cindermane paces his quarters, clenching his fists while the weight of his failure settles in. Convinced that the ape has been biding his time, waiting for the exact moment the fruit would be ready, meanwhile he stares at a dark, chained figure, wondering how the hell the ape broke his mental restrictions, while Cindermane lets out a frustrated groan, realizing his scouts have completely failed to report this discovery, so he channels his own dark energy, letting it crackle around him as he swears vengeance on his rival. Barking orders at his subordinates to assemble the regiments for an immediate march toward the mountain. And turning to his cousin, Cindermane prepares to lead the charge to take what he believes is rightfully his. Rydell reminds his cousin that he is not blind to the troop movements, but his cousin mocks him for the irony of the beast hordes turning against their own, and the cousin laughs, clearly eager to see how the elders will react to this failure, dismissing Rydell's concerns and insisting that he alone will handle the monkey problem. So the cousin corrects him with a chuckle, claiming he will not be the one to fix anything, before unsheathing a blade to settle the power struggle right there in the room, and Rydell questions if he is openly revolting against the clan's sacred precepts, yet the cousin only smirks, knowing full well that their grandfather is already aware of the shift, as the cousin explains that the elders appointed him to oversee the general due to his lack of experience. Showing Rydell the written order that grants him temporary control over all military operations, and Rydell snatches the document away, his frustration boiling over as he reads the fine print, holding the decree tightly while realizing the gravity of his sudden demotion, while Rydell stares at the paper in disbelief, realizing his grandfather has officially sidelined him, so the cousin patronizingly suggests Rydell stay in the castle for his own safety. But Rydell simply drops the order and declares his intent to retrieve the fruit regardless, and the cousin turns away, leaving Rydell behind while the guards move in to secure the area, as Rydell reflects on the vision of the tree, knowing exactly where he needs to go, focusing his resolve despite the political trap closing in around him, while the system update confirms a 12-hour window until the fruit of Ascension fully ripens. And he prepares to embrace the struggle for supremacy now that the location is finally revealed. The system is clearly goading these forces into a bloodbath, and neither the demons nor the monsters will let the other just walk away with the prize, so Rydell realizes he's walking into a meat grinder if he pursues the fruit, knowing full well that this entire play is basically a suicide mission, but the sheer stakes of the system quest leave him no room to back down. As he watches the power radiating from the tree, knowing he can't let it fall to his enemies, so he commits to the objective despite the overwhelming odds piling up against him. And since there are still 12 hours until the fruit ripens, he decides to play it smart, because showing up early would just make him a sitting duck for the warring factions. Unlike his rivals, Rydell has no massive army to absorb the damage for him, which forces him to prioritize stealth and avoid drawing any unnecessary attention, hoping to swoop in at the final second and maybe even take out the Herald while he's at it, because this is truly his last chance to settle his mounting problems, so he sets his sights on the distant tree carrying his weapon with grim resolve, accepting that failure is not an option if he wants to survive this nightmare as he moves through the rugged terrain, his boots crunching against the frozen earth. And he stops to catch his breath, scanning the horizon for any sign of his targets, listening to the chaotic sounds of the ongoing skirmish echoing through the valley, while the demons and monsters clash in a brutal display of mindless violence, and Rydell watches from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The battlefield is a meat grinder where demons currently have the upper hand, though Rydell notes the conflict is still in its early, volatile stages. Seeing how the monkeys compensate for their lack of magic with raw, brutal attrition, and their ability to fight on their own home turf makes them surprisingly resilient, providing the exact kind of distraction Rydell needs to make his move. Then a sudden movement catches his eye near the front lines, where a high-ranking commander carves through the fray with terrifying efficiency, prompting Rydell to realize the fortress is now dangerously undefended. So he leaps toward the chaos, banking on his disguise to keep him hidden, landing hard on the perimeter as the battle rages around him, slipping through the outskirts while masquerading as a demon in a tattered cloak. But his cover is instantly tested when he crosses paths with a patrol, getting stopped by a sharp-eyed demon who demands his identification in their tongue, while Rydell desperately tries to bluff his way through the tense encounter. Walking past them with feigned nonchalance to avoid a direct confrontation, only for the demon to realize his true nature and call him out, forcing Rydell to parry a lethal spear thrust with nothing but his blade. As the patrol turns their full attention toward the exposed human, and Rydell channels his energy into a desperate high-speed counter, launching himself into the closing gap to end the fight before reinforcements arrive. Rydell slices through the guard with a single, precise strike, barely registering the surprise on the demon's face as his armor buckles, sweeping through the remaining hostiles to clear his path forward, finishing the last one with a burst of raw, crackling energy, but he's already checking his internal timer, 19 minutes until the fruit ripens. And he knows he has to conserve his power for the real prize, pausing to assess the strange, drained landscape around him, where the valley's cosmic energy seems to have completely vanished, crumbling the very trees beneath his touch as he surveys the damage, while in the distance the main skirmish rages on with terrifying intensity, forcing him to stay alert as a stray combatant stumbles into his line of sight, caught off guard by the sudden, violent shift in the environment, and Rydell eliminates the threat before it can sound an alarm, realizing he's forced to abandon his cover to reach the ripening point, making a calculated sprint through the chaos toward the western flank, hoping the heavier fighting in the east will mask his movements, pushing his speed to the limit as the timer ticks down. 10 minutes left and the valley is descending into total anarchy, dodging between the clashing armies to stay out of their crossfire, until he finally catches a glimpse of the bizarre reality unfolding before him. Rydell spots a massive force field blocking his path, noting the system-generated fractals and betting the barrier will drop once the fruit ripens. With the timer now showing 6 minutes left until harvest, as a heavily armored combatant engages a massive, snarling beast in a brutal clash, and Rydell observes the exchange while measuring the gap in their power, flashing a dangerous smirk as he prepares to intervene, diving into the fray to unleash a precise, lethal strike against the monster, which leaves the beast reeling and howling in pure frustration, while Rydell exploits the opening to deliver another clean, damaging blow, forcing the creature to stagger back and catch its breath, as the timer drops to just 2 minutes, and Rydell realizes the Herald is struggling to even scratch the beast's hide, knowing he has to be the one to finally turn the tide of this fight with only 1 minute and 45 seconds left on the clock, leaving the beast completely disoriented by his sudden, aggressive shift in strategy, while Rydell channels his focus for one final, devastating maneuver, maintaining that icy grin as he pushes his combat speed to the absolute limit, cutting through the air with a strike aimed to finish the beast once and for all, as the impact erupts in a massive shockwave that rattles the surrounding area, and the dust begins to settle on the battlefield as the countdown enters its final stretch. Rydell frantically scans the area, desperately searching for the source of the sudden attack, before a flash of light forces him to instinctively raise his blade in defense, and he barely manages to parry the incoming strike, immediately recognizing the armor of the opponent who once killed Keverin, while his attacker spins around to launch a relentless high-speed counteroffensive, leaving Rydell struggling to match the sheer velocity of these movements, as a razor-sharp arc of energy narrowly misses his midsection, forcing both combatants to leap across the crater in a chaotic flurry of steel, and Rydell pauses for a breath, cursing the exhaustion slowing him down, while the armored stranger discards his depleted enchantment to engage in a fair duel, leaving the two warriors standing on opposite ends of the cracked, desolate terrain, as Rydell locks eyes with the native leader who has been orchestrating the ambush, who openly mocks Rydell for finally emerging from the shadows to face them. With only 1 minute left until the fruit reaches full maturity, as the leader challenges Rydell to prove his worth in a direct confrontation, and Rydell realizes this opponent is leagues above anyone he has battled thus far, knowing even his own strength rating is being completely overshadowed. But he refuses to back down, steadying his grip for the inevitable collision, while Rydell calls out to his primate ally to set aside their petty grievances. And the beast lets out a deafening roar to signal that the real fight is beginning. Rydell dodges the initial strike, leaving the ground shattered beneath his feet. Then both fighters launch into a high-speed exchange that blurs the air, colliding with such force that a shockwave ripples across the entire battlefield, forcing Rydell to retreat as the armored opponent presses the offensive, while the general's weapon crackles with a lethal, concentrated energy. And Rydell realizes his current power level is completely insufficient against this display, desperately searching for any opening to turn the tide before he is overwhelmed. With only 34 seconds remaining until the fruit finishes its ripening process, observing the native leader positioning himself to intercept the prize immediately, as the terrain shifts and crumbles under the intensity of their ongoing duel, noting the general and the final herald preparing for their own decisive move. When the energy surge from the ripening fruit reaches a blinding, critical peak, seizing the split-second distraction to make his final, calculated push, grabbing his weapon with every ounce of remaining strength as the clock hits 15 seconds, closing the distance in a blur of motion to disrupt their formation, fully committed to taking down both targets in this singular, reckless gamble, channeling his internal power into a massive, sweeping arc of pure kinetic force. Closing in on the 10-second mark with a speed that defies all expectations, catching the general and the native leader off guard by his sudden, violent intervention, and slamming into their defenses just as the final countdown begins to expire. The impact forces the general and native leader to recoil from the sudden, overwhelming blast, leaving the battlefield shrouded in debris as the 5-second warning flashes across the void. Rydell wastes no time, sprinting through the collapsing stone to close the remaining gap, jumping across the unstable terrain with just 2 seconds left on the cosmic clock, swinging his weapon in a wide arc to shatter the protective barrier surrounding the tree. The energy field fractures like glass and dissolves into shimmering dust, revealing the fruit finally reaching its peak state of power, slicing the stem with surgical precision before the remaining defenses can react. Snatching the prize out of the air while mid-flight to secure the objective, landing firmly with the artifact clutched tightly in his hand, acknowledging the real challenge has only just begun as he glances back at his pursuers, and turning to face the general and native leader to make his desperate escape.